Okay.
So, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mary Helen Fine. I'm one of Mountain Stream's community Dharma leaders, which means that I took a bunch of training classes. It was a 2-year training at Spirit Rock with Jack Cornfield and other teachers. And it was wonderful. And, I'm allowed to give talks and lead day-longs and do interviews. I'm not a residential retreat leader, but I'm allowed to do other things. We practiced everything there in those years, and I took a couple of other trainings at Spirit Rock as well in Buddhist studies, and really got so much out of it. So I very much enjoy this part of being a community Dharma leader and leading these groups and giving talks on Buddhist on the Buddhist teachings on the Dharma. So I told my phone not to make any noise, but it doesn't listen. So tonight I'm going to talk about wise speech. And I can just start out by giving what I think is a good definition of wise speech. Wise speech is speech that ultimately gives rise to happiness. Happiness in oneself, if one is speaking, and happiness in others who may hear your words. And that is so simple, isn't it? But we forget it. We forget that that's just the simple definition of wise speech. It makes people happy. Our natural state, I believe that our natural state as human beings is to be happy, to be loving, and to be kind to one another. What gets in the way of that? What gets in the way of that is that we suffer. And when we're suffering, we're not happy. We're not necessarily loving, and we're not necessarily kind, even though that's our natural state. Why do we suffer? Suffering is the first noble truth. Why do we suffer? And the Buddha said the second noble truth, because we have craving. That craving manifests itself, it might manifest itself as greed. It might manifest itself as a craving to push something away, aversion, or it might manifest itself as delusion. So we suffer because we get into greed, hatred, and delusion. But the third noble truth says there's a way out. We can stop suffering. And the question answered in the fourth noble truth, how do we do that? We want to stop suffering. Please tell us how to do it. And the Buddha said, follow the Eightfold Path. That is the way out of suffering. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is because one of the folds on the Eightfold Path is wise speech. So I'd just like to put that in context. I'm going to put up if I can share my screen, I think I can. Yeah. I'm just going to put up a slide of the Eightfold Path, and just go over it with you a little bit. Can you see that okay? Good. So the Eightfold Path, here we have wise speech. It's part of the Eightfold Path divides in 3 parts. We start with wise view, also known as wise understanding. And our understanding gives rise to all of our intentions. If we have wise understanding, if we understand that everything is impermanent, if we understand that our ego is not what our life is about, if we understand suffering is part of being alive, that's wise view. And that gives rise to wise intentions. So that's wisdom. That's the first part of the Eightfold Path. And the second part of the Eightfold Path is ethical conduct. And that's where we find wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood. These are all about non-harming. And then the last part of the Eightfold Path, our mental development, is making an effort, being mindful, and learning to concentrate. So look at the company that you find around wise speech. It's up there with mindfulness. It's up there with concentration. It's a very important part of the practice. I just wanted to make that point that it's right up there in the Eightfold Path. The Buddha said, I teach only suffering and the end of suffering. And the Eightfold Path is this key to the end of suffering. I'll stop with that. I don't know how to spotlight myself. Can you do it, Robin?
You are spotlighted.
Oh, I am?
Yeah.
Great. Because I want to get it in the, there we go. I want to get it in the recording. Okay. So I love this quote from Gil Fronsdale. He said, when you're meditating, watch your mind. When you're out in the world, watch your speech. It is kind of a meditation to watch your speech as we go through the day, all the things that we say, and not just our speech, but the motivation behind our speech. You can learn so much about yourself when you take the time to be present to your motivations. It's a doorway, a real doorway to self-discovery. We're always talking about how to bring practice into our everyday lives. So I think that being mindful of speech is a wonderful approach to that. If we could set an aim to be mindful of our speech, just like for the next 15 minutes, what's our speech about? What is our motivation? It's a very powerful place to direct your mindfulness, and you will learn so much from it. So it also includes our body language. It includes our facial expressions. It includes all the different ways that we communicate. So what I'm mostly describing now is embodied speech. But we also have disembodied speech. So when you send someone an email, you're not there in your body when they read it. So they're getting disembodied speech. We have a lot of disembodied speech in our, we have texts, we have emails, we have websites, we have podcasts, we have the radio. And when you are dealing with somebody who's not there, it's much harder. You can't read their facial expressions. It's much harder to know what their motivation is. And you can't see the person and they can't see you. So that's one of the difficulties in our modern ways of communicating, that we have a lot of disembodied speech. One of the basics of Buddhism that I learned early on was 5 guidelines for recognizing wise speech. I don't know if you've heard these, but I'm going to go over them because they're kind of little rules, but I think they can be very helpful. So the 5 guidelines, the first one, is it true? So if you're going to say something that's not true, the odds of it being wise speech are just about 0. Is it true? The second guideline, is it kind? You know, this is the fundamental Buddhist principle. If you're not if what you're saying is not kind, it couldn't be wise. If you're saying something to hurt someone, it's not wise speech. Is it useful? Will it help? Is it beneficial? That's the third guideline. Is it useful? Because it might be true, it might be kind, but it might not be helpful to the person for some reason. The fourth guideline, does what I'm saying unite people and produce concordance, or will it drive people apart and divide them into factions and create discord? So that's a very important question to ask. And that becomes very important. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later when we have a really important agenda that we want to talk about, like something that people need to do, and we want to convince them to do it. And so we might say things that are divisive. We'll talk more about that. And the last one, I love this last guideline, is it the right time? You may have something to say that's true, that's kind, that's useful, that produces concordance, but it's not the right time to say it. You have to take a look at the person you're speaking to, see where they are. Are they in the heat of the moment? Can they hear? So this is a very key thing. Is it the right time? So this little list, I kind of like it. I think it's useful. It's kind of rule-based, a little simplistic. So let's maybe look at another way of deciding whether something is wise speech or not. And this is my real point tonight. The point I want to make is that you can tell if you're engaging in wise speech if you check in with your own inner state. You can tell if what you're saying is wise speech by checking in with your own inner state. If your inner state is calm and peaceful and kindly, wise speech. If what you're saying starts to make you agitated, if it makes you give up your heart's ease, ask yourself, is it worth it? Do I want to give up my heart's ease to make this point? Is what I'm about to say going to make me lose the whole loving quality of my inner state? I came here feeling good and warm and kind, and now I need to make this very important point, but it's making me agitated. I'm losing my inner integrity. So checking in with your inner state and seeing what your own speech is doing to it, that's very different from a list of rules, isn't it? And very powerful, I think. The rules are useful. They're good little rules. They're useful reminders. But if we can learn, I think that's one of the things about the practice, to learn to be in touch with that inner state as much as possible as our kind of reference point for everything, and learn to let that inner state guide us. How am I feeling about what I'm doing? How am I feeling inside? You might hear criticism that being tuned in to this inner state, paying so much attention to this inner state, is a kind of self-absorption. The Buddhist sitting in his cave contemplating his navel and only thinking about himself. Remember that one? Yeah. So just what I want to just say about that is that inner state, a state of ease inside, is never self-absorbed, because it's not wrapped up, it's not ego-driven, it's not got a self-aggrandizing agenda. That inner state is open to others. It's kind, it's gentle, it's friendly, and it wishes others well. So it can never be self-absorbed. I just wanted to put that aside in case people say that. So it's not true. Self-absorption is not a peaceful state. So we're all human beings, right? And sometimes we hurt other people, don't we? When we do, if you're normally feeling pretty settled and peaceful, you'll notice that when you do harm to others, you harm yourself. You'll notice that your inner state starts to desert you. It starts to become agitated. And so you're suffering. You're cutting your connection to yourself. And that happens mostly when I tend to focus on the object of my agenda. Like what I have to say is so important. Like suppose I want to say something about racism or about unconscious bias. That's so important that people realize that. And I want to improve the situation. I want to have an impact. I want to help these people understand how they're messing up. But this is a really little point to teeter on and dance on, because you might want to make a strong argument here for it being okay to do harm. But I think that is something to be very careful of, because I don't think it's okay to do harm, not in the interest of anything. I don't think there's anything that makes it worth it, because not only does it hurt the other person, it doesn't help them to bring a kindness to themselves and to see themselves and to see their illusions, and it hurts you. So sometimes you can see that when you're harming someone else, you're harming yourself. And when you feel it yourself, that's different from noticing that someone else is feeling it. And that's powerful. So sometimes it's the speaker who gets hurt more than the listener. There's a story told about the Buddha. There was a man who was very angry about something, and he wanted to express his anger. So he came to the Buddha, and he started to go on and on about his anger. And the Buddha sat quietly and listened. And the man went on, and when he was finally finished, the Buddha asked him a question. He said, imagine someone came to your house and wanted to give you a gift. And they put this gift down, but you don't accept it. So the man leaves, but he leaves the gift behind. Now, who does this gift belong to? So the angry man replies, well, it still belongs to that guy. I didn't accept it. It's not mine. And the Buddha said, that is correct. And in the same way, I don't accept your anger. It still belongs to you. I had to think about that story quite a bit, but I think it's a good story. So just tuck it away and think about it later. The Buddha made the point that the man's anger was just like this quote unquote gift that had been left behind. And it's not, he didn't accept it. It's not his, it's still the other man's. So talking about wise speech, one of the things to look at is our motivation. If we can learn to pause before we speak, and it's very hard to think before you speak, isn't it? But if we can take a moment and look at what's motivating us to speak, it's pretty easy to see what's going on. It's pretty easy to see the difference between anger motivating what you're about to say next, or trying to be kind motivating what you're about to say next. It's easy to see whether you're trying to bring people together or drive them apart. If we can bring mindfulness to our speech, again, it's just this very big part of our day, because we talk a fair amount, right? So if we can bring this, it's a way to bring our practice into our everyday life, something we're always looking for. I recently put up, this is a digression, but I recently put up signs around my house because I'd given a talk. I don't know if it was here on Monday night, it might have been, but I gave a talk about mindfulness in daily life. And everybody was talking about the little things that they do, like, oh, every time I pick up the coffee pot, I wake up. I have just set that little object as a wake up, or if every time I touch this doorknob. And one person talked about putting signs around her house that said, wake up. And I've never done that. And I've always thought it was just like, I don't know, a little too basic. But she was very convincing. So I tried it. And she said, put one in the bathroom on the mirror where you brush your teeth, and put one in the kitchen because she knew I like to cook near the stove where you'll see it. So there's a wake up in the kitchen and there's a wake up on the bathroom mirror. And the night that I did that, the very night, a friend came over. And when she left, she had left this, it looked like a quarter in the other bathroom, but it had a Buddha on it. It wasn't a coin, it was a Buddha, a quarter with a Buddha. I said, okay, well, that's another sign. I'm going to leave that right where she put it. So I have 3 signs around the house. So, I started noticing, it's been a week or two, and I would see them and I thought that when I saw a sign that said wake up, I would wake up and I would be more mindful. But that isn't what happened. Instead, every time I saw one of those signs, I felt this beautiful warmth. I felt this kindness inside and this gratitude for the practice, and just this warm feeling came over me every time I saw the wake up signs, and it still is. And so when I see them now, I just smile and they make me happy. It was very unexpected. And I think that warmth, is just such an essential part of the practice, to grow that warmth, to bring that warmth to other people, to bring that warmth to everything. Reverend Vivian from Shasta Abbey gave a talk at the Auburn group last week, and she talked about warmth, and she said, when I'm in a hurry, I don't bring warmth to anything, and I want to bring warmth to everything, that bring warmth to my phone, bring warmth to, pick things up and bring warmth to them. And I never thought about bringing warmth to objects. I had just gotten to people barely. But I thought that's so great, bring warmth to trying to figure out how this thing works, how, the battery in my watch or something, bring warmth to these processes instead of just being, oh, I just got to finish this and get on to the next thing, which is what motivates a lot. So anyway, I think this warmth, this idea of warmth is so important. And checking in with ourselves is really the key to so much, and especially wise speech. So, wise speech is more than just words. I think that was the title of my talk. Joseph Goldstein said that when he leads retreats, a lot of times, retreatants will write a note and stick it on the bulletin board for him because he's the leader. And they'll write really aversive notes, like, he didn't give this example, but I imagine that a student, maybe me, might write, the guy next to me cannot be still. I can't possibly meditate with him jumping around all the time. Could you please speak to him about it? And then they'll sign it with metta. And there's no metta there. It's just, they sign everything metta. But the whole thing was totally aversive. So words come out of our mouths that don't have anything behind them sometimes. I thought that was just a great example. Talking a little more about the disembodied. Did I talk about disembodied speech? Yeah, I did. That we have email and yeah. So I think disembodied speech is, email's a blessing, but it's also a bane because the person isn't there. And we don't really know necessarily what their motive was. We don't have facial expressions. We don't have body language. We don't have just, that connection of being in the room with them and feeling their energy. So when you get a nasty email from someone, can you I started out by saying the wise speech abides in loving kindness and concern for the welfare of whoever hears it. It abides. Let me go back to page 1 and read that again, because that's such a great definition. Wise speech is speech that ultimately gives rise to happiness in oneself and others. It is our natural state is to be happy and loving and kind. And that's the way wise speech works. It's happy and loving and kind. But in disembodied speech, it's very hard to tell where the person's coming from. So a lot of misconception happens and miscommunication happens when we assume that we know what the person's motivation is, and we could be wrong, especially with disembodied speech. So if you get a nasty email from somebody, I got one today, actually, from somebody, and it was subtle, but I was like, how dare they say that, and then I had to like calm down a little bit. And I haven't answered it, but I think, well, here's what the Buddha said. Regardless of how people address you, you should abide with a heart of loving kindness and concern for their welfare. Imagine someone is yelling at you, wanting to harm you. Can you abide with a heart of loving kindness and concern for their welfare? That's a pretty great question, isn't it? So with this person who sent me this email, I have to remember that her mother died last month. And she lived with her mother. She's very close to her mother. And she's out there. She's having a very hard time. So if you stop and think about what could be motivating the person, you may see that they're suffering. And then your anger with them just melts into compassion for what they're going through. So that's what I'm trying to remember about this person who sent me the nasty email. So I'm going to try to write a very different email from what I would have written back to her, and which is sitting in my drafts folder and needs to be deleted. Because I see she's really having a hard time. And that's what's motivating her. So can we bring mindfulness into our speech? Can we be kind and caring? We're often very reactive to people's behavior, and their speech is part of their behavior. But it's can be very exciting when someone's behaving bad if you can remember not to react immediately. Can you just sit back and look and see what's really going on with that person? They may be doing obnoxious things, unpleasant things, harmful things, but can you look at the whole person? And when you do that, when your eyes open like that, can you see the suffering that is causing their behavior? Happy people don't act that way. They're not obnoxious. And you'll see the suffering, and you may very well drop out of your anger and into compassion for their suffering. So we try not to respond to the behavior. We try to respond regardless of the behavior. So the last point I want to make is that one of the most important principles of the Buddhist teachings, one of the most important things to me that I've learned from Buddhism, is that we are the only custodians of our own inner life. I'm going to say that again. I'll say you. You are the only custodian of your inner life. It has nothing to do with anybody else but you. So this is one of the main functions of the practice, to teach us to protect our inner life. So how's our inner life doing? How's our inner state? It may not be great, but is it a little better than yesterday? Better's good. Better's enough. Is our inner state as good as it could be? Maybe not. But is it a little bit better? Is it not as bad? Slowly, can we learn what the things that we do, the actions, the speech, the livelihood, what makes our inner life better and what makes it worse? Can we be a good custodian of our inner state? Can we communicate from that place? Can we communicate from a place that supports our inner life, that supports the well-being of our heart? Can we be kind and support the well-being of the people around us? Can we support the well-being of all people? So I'd love to open this up to discussion. I'm going to stop recording.